Hillman sets a screen, rolls to the basket. Gray.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. For a moment, the entire world of women's basketball seemed to pause. Cameras were rolling, the conversation felt relaxed, and Caitlin Clark sat calmly in her chair. She smiled, looked completely composed, and then said 6 simple words. On the surface, it sounded like just another comment in a long sports interview. But within minutes, those 6 words started echoing across the league. Reporters clipped the moment. Fans replayed it online. Analysts debated what she really meant. What sounded casual at first suddenly felt like something much bigger. The strange part was the timing. Clark didn't say those words after a big win or during a heated press conference following a tough loss. She said them during a quiet period in her own career while she was recovering from injury and sitting away from the court. Most athletes in that situation tend to keep their heads down. They focus on healing, avoid controversy, and wait patiently for their return to competition. But Clark did something different. Instead of disappearing from the conversation, she stepped directly into it. And by the time people realized what she had done, the message had already traveled through every corner of the WNBA. To understand why those 6 words mattered so much, you have to look at the atmosphere surrounding the league at that moment. The WNBA was experiencing one of the most exciting seasons in its history. Ticket sales were climbing to record levels. Television viewership was rising. Arena attendance was higher than it had been in years. New fans were discovering the league every week. The energy surrounding women's basketball was growing faster than ever before. A huge part of that surge in attention came from Caitlin Clark herself. During her college career at Iowa, she had become a generational star. She broke the all-time NCAA scoring record, finishing her college run with an astonishing total of 3,951 points. Her long-range shooting, fearless confidence, and ability to control games turned her into one of the most talked-about athletes in the entire sports world. Millions of people who had never followed women's basketball suddenly started watching because of her. When Clark entered the WNBA, that attention followed her immediately. Fans flooded arenas just to see her play. Indiana Fever games sold out at home and on the road. Teams that had once struggled to fill seats suddenly found themselves playing in packed arenas whenever Clark came to town. Jerseys flew off store shelves. Social media exploded with highlights. It felt as if the entire league had been lifted into a new spotlight overnight. But behind that excitement, another story was quietly developing. Many players, coaches, and fans were growing increasingly frustrated with officiating across the league. At first, the complaints were small. A missed call here, a questionable whistle there. But as the season continued, the frustration grew louder. Clips from games began circulating online within minutes after the final buzzer. Fans slowed down the footage frame by frame, pointing out missed fouls and questionable decisions. Sometimes players took hard contact without receiving a whistle. Other times, minor contact suddenly resulted in fouls that completely shifted the flow of a game. The inconsistencies began to feel like a pattern rather than isolated mistakes. Every week, new video clips appeared online showing moments where players seemed to be hit, grabbed, or pushed without any call from the referees. The discussions quickly spread across platforms like Twitter, Reddit, and sports forums. Fans debated whether the officiating crews were struggling to keep up with the faster pace of the modern game. Others argued that star players were being treated differently from veterans. Some believed the league simply needed better training and oversight for referees. Inside locker rooms, the frustration was even stronger. Professional athletes rely on consistency in officiating to compete fairly. When players feel that the rules are being applied differently from game to game, it creates tension across the entire league. Coaches began expressing concern during press conferences. Players hinted at their frustrations in post-game interviews. But speaking too directly about officiating often came with consequences. Fines were issued. Warnings were delivered.
Clock to 1, Lloyd. Oh yeah! Jewel Lloyd!
The message from league leadership was clear. Keep the criticism internal and avoid public complaints. Then came a statement from the WNBA commissioner that ignited even more debate. In an attempt to quiet the growing controversy, She suggested that winning teams generally do not complain about officiating. The line was meant to encourage focus and professionalism, but many people interpreted it differently. Fans felt as if their concerns were being dismissed. Players felt as though their experiences on the court were being ignored. Instead of calming the conversation, the statement made the debate even louder. It created the impression that the league leadership did not fully understand how serious the issue had become. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark was watching all of this unfold from the sidelines. A shin injury had forced her to miss stretches of the season, leaving her unable to contribute on the court the way she normally would. For an athlete known for her competitiveness, sitting out games was incredibly frustrating. Injuries bring uncertainty. Recovery timelines shift. Some days feel better than others. It becomes difficult to plan or predict when full strength will return. Many injured players choose to step away from the spotlight during that time. They focus entirely on rehabilitation. They stay quiet publicly and wait for their opportunity to return. Clark, however, used the time differently.
The Dream currently the slowest team in the...
She observed. From the bench, she had a perspective that active players rarely experience during the season. When you are on the court, everything moves quickly. Your attention is focused on your own assignments, your own teammates, and the immediate flow of the game. But from the sideline, the entire picture becomes clearer. Clark watched every possession closely. She paid attention to how games were being called. She studied when referees allowed physical contact and when they blew the whistle. She observed how different teams were treated in different situations. Without the pressure of playing, she could see patterns developing across the league. According to people close to the Indiana Fever organization, Clark spent much of her recovery time reviewing game film. Not just footage of her own performances, but games involving completely different teams. She wanted to understand how the officiating affected the league as a whole. That kind of analysis takes patience. It requires stepping back from personal performance and looking at the broader system. Clark wasn't just waiting to return to basketball. She was learning more about the structure surrounding it. Then came the moment that would eventually spark a league-wide discussion. Clark appeared as a guest on a podcast hosted by Sue Bird. For anyone who understands basketball history, that platform carried enormous significance. Sue Bird is widely respected as one of the greatest players to ever compete in women's basketball. Her career includes multiple Olympic gold medals and several WNBA championships. Over the years, she earned admiration from teammates, opponents, coaches, and league executives alike. Her podcast had become a space where athletes felt comfortable speaking openly about the realities of professional sports. Conversations there were thoughtful rather than rushed. Guests had time to explain their perspectives fully instead of squeezing answers into quick sound bites. Clark understood that environment. Instead of dropping a controversial comment in a crowded media scrum after practice, she chose a setting where a deeper conversation could take place. The decision showed careful thought. By speaking in that space, she ensured that her words would be heard clearly rather than misinterpreted through short clips. During the interview, the conversation covered many topics. Clark spoke about her transition from college to the professional level. She discussed the physical demands of the WNBA schedule and the learning process that every rookie must go through. She talked about the excitement surrounding the growth of women's basketball and the incredible support she had received from fans. Eventually, the discussion turned toward officiating. Clark didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. Her tone remained calm and thoughtful. But the message behind her words was unmistakable. She acknowledged that the league was growing rapidly and that the attention surrounding games had never been greater.
She can't believe it!
With that growth, she suggested, came the responsibility to ensure that the quality of officiating kept pace with the talent on the court. Those 6 words became the center of attention. They weren't an attack. They weren't a complaint. Instead, they felt like a direct challenge to the league's leadership to recognize the issue and address it openly. Clark essentially voiced what many players and fans had already been discussing privately. Within hours, the clip spread across social media. Sports analysts replayed the moment on television. Online forums filled with debate. Some people praised Clark for speaking honestly about a topic that had been ignored for too long. Others argued that rookies should avoid criticizing league systems so early in their careers. But regardless of which side people supported, one fact became impossible to ignore. The conversation about officiating had suddenly moved to the center of the league's public discussion. Players across the WNBA began responding. Some subtly supported Clark's viewpoint by sharing similar experiences. Others emphasized the importance of respecting officials while still working toward improvement. Coaches carefully navigated questions from reporters who wanted to know whether they agreed with Clark's comments. Even former players joined the conversation, explaining how officiating consistency has always been one of the most challenging aspects of professional basketball leagues. For the WNBA, the situation presented both a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, public criticism of officiating can create tension between players, referees, and league leadership. On the other hand, acknowledging concerns can lead to improvements that strengthen the sport. Many experts argued that addressing the issue openly would help build trust with the rapidly growing fan base. Clark herself remained composed throughout the aftermath. She didn't escalate the situation with additional comments or dramatic statements. Instead, she allowed the conversation to develop naturally. Her original message had already sparked the discussion she wanted. As the days passed, league officials began emphasizing their commitment to evaluating officiating performance and providing additional training where necessary. While no immediate sweeping changes were announced, the increased attention placed pressure on the system to evolve. In many ways, the moment demonstrated how much influence a single voice can have in modern sports. Caitlin Clark had entered the WNBA as a rookie, yet her presence had already reshaped the visibility of the entire league. Millions of new fans were watching games because of her. Media outlets that rarely covered women's basketball were now dedicating full segments to it. With that kind of spotlight came the ability to raise questions that could not easily be ignored. The story was never just about 6 words. It was about timing, awareness, and the power of choosing the right platform. Clark understood the environment surrounding the league, and she knew exactly when the conversation needed to happen. Whether people agreed with her or not, those words forced everyone involved in women's basketball to examine the system more closely. And sometimes, that kind of examination is exactly what drives a sport forward. As the season continued and Clark worked her way back from injury, fans waited eagerly for her return to the court. But even before she stepped back into a game, she had already changed the conversation surrounding the WNBA. And for many observers, that moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in the evolution of women's basketball.
Of X Factor's Ariel Atkins off balance.
There are only a few places in women's sports where an athlete can speak openly about something uncomfortable and still be heard as thoughtful rather than controversial. In most situations, difficult topics get reduced to headlines, clipped quotes, or emotional reactions online. But there are rare platforms where the conversation carries weight, where the audience understands the sport deeply, and where the words spoken are treated with seriousness instead of being dismissed as frustration. That was exactly why Caitlin Clark chose the stage she did. When she spoke during Sue Bird's podcast, it wasn't just another interview appearance. It was a calculated decision about where her message would land. Sue Bird is not simply a former player with a microphone. She is one of the most respected figures in the history of women's basketball, someone whose career represents decades of credibility and trust inside the sport. Because of that reputation, conversations on her platform carry a tone that feels more reflective and meaningful. Clark understood that difference. If she had posted a single sentence on social media, it might have been screenshot, misinterpreted, or dismissed as emotional frustration. If she had said the same thing in a quick post-practice press conference, it likely would have been buried among dozens of routine quotes from athletes around the league. But by choosing a long-form conversation in a space respected by players, coaches, and fans alike, Clark gave her words a level of seriousness that they otherwise might not have had. It sent a subtle but powerful message. She wasn't venting. She wasn't reacting impulsively. She was speaking deliberately in a place that values honest discussion about the game. The timing of her comment was just as important as the platform she chose. At that moment, the debate about officiating in the WNBA had already reached a boiling point. Fans were actively sharing clips of questionable calls from games across the league. Analysts were debating whether officiating crews were struggling to keep up with the pace and physicality of the modern game. Coaches and players had already hinted at frustrations, though most were careful not to speak too openly because of potential fines or warnings from the league. The conversation was already loud. Clark didn't create that environment. Instead, she stepped directly into it at exactly the right moment. When she finally spoke, the audience was already primed to listen. People were already searching for someone with enough visibility and credibility to acknowledge what many fans believed they were seeing. Then she delivered her comment calmly, almost casually. Her tone made it sound like a simple observation rather than a dramatic accusation. But the effect was immediate. The words landed with the precision of one of her deep three-point shots: quiet release, perfect timing, and maximum impact. Within minutes of the clip appearing online, it spread across social media at an astonishing pace. Fans didn't wait hours for the conversation to build gradually. The moment exploded instantly. The video was clipped, captioned, and reposted thousands of times across multiple platforms. Sports fans began sharing the quote alongside game footage, showing controversial calls from recent WNBA matchups. Some of the clips involved games Clark herself had played in. Others came from matchups between entirely different teams. But each new video was paired with the same idea, the moment Clark had described. Soon a phrase began trending online. Fans repeated it again and again while sharing footage of questionable officiating decisions. What started as one player's observation quickly evolved into a broader conversation about the consistency of officiating across the entire league.
The last two games of this regular season is Citron takes and makes from deep.
The discussion spread far beyond traditional basketball circles. Entertainment pages began covering the story. Major sports networks picked up the clip and replayed it during debate segments. Even media outlets that rarely discussed women's basketball started referencing Clark's comment while exploring the growing visibility of the WNBA. Suddenly, Clark found herself in a role she had never officially chosen. To many fans online, she became an unofficial voice of accountability within the sport. Every questionable call in the days that followed was compared to the moment she had described. Whenever referees missed contact or allowed a physical play without a whistle, fans immediately connected it back to her words. The internet had assigned her a role that no player in the league had quite held before. While the public conversation grew louder, the atmosphere behind the scenes inside the league was reportedly far more complicated. League executives were forced to decide how to respond to a moment that had suddenly become one of the most talked about topics in professional basketball. Within internal discussions, opinions were divided. Some officials believed the league should respond quickly. They felt that publicly questioning officiating integrity crossed an unwritten line that had long existed in professional sports. From that perspective, the best strategy would be to contact Clark privately, remind her of league expectations regarding public criticism, and encourage the situation to cool down naturally. For decades, many leagues had handled uncomfortable topics in exactly that way. Quiet conversations behind closed doors rather than public confrontations. But another group inside the league saw the situation very differently. They understood that Caitlin Clark was not just another player making a passing comment. By that point, her impact on the WNBA was already enormous. Her games were selling out arenas across the country. Television ratings had jumped significantly whenever she was on the court. Sponsors had begun investing more heavily in the league because of the surge in attention surrounding her arrival. Trying to silence or publicly challenge the most visible player in the sport carried serious risks.
KT even put it in.
In the era of social media, turning a popular athlete into a symbol of censorship can create a backlash that spreads far beyond the original controversy. A player with millions of followers and a rapidly growing fan base could easily become a rallying point for criticism directed at the league itself. That reality forced executives to think carefully about their next move. Meanwhile, another layer of tension was developing among the referees themselves. Some officials reportedly felt that Clark's comment had placed them in an unfair spotlight. Officiating professional sports is already one of the most scrutinized jobs in athletics. Every decision happens in real time under the eyes of thousands of spectators and millions of viewers watching on television. When the viral clip spread across social media, many referees suddenly found themselves at the center of online criticism. Fans began reviewing game footage frame by frame, analyzing calls and non-calls with intense scrutiny. For some officials, the situation felt personal. Yet even within the officiating community, reactions were mixed. A few referees privately acknowledged that the inconsistencies Clark had referenced were not entirely imaginary. Statistical reviews of foul patterns from earlier games had already raised questions among analysts about uneven officiating trends. Coaches had also raised concerns internally during the season. Those conversations simply had not reached the public spotlight until Clark's comment gave them a voice. In the middle of all this tension, the league made a surprising decision. They said nothing. There was no official press release addressing the situation. No public clarification. No defensive statement about the integrity of officiating crews. The WNBA leadership chose complete silence. At first, that absence of response puzzled many observers. But as the days passed, it became clear that the silence itself had consequences. In the world of public communication, leaving a story undefined often allows someone else to shape the narrative. In this case, Clark's perspective filled the vacuum. Television shows continued replaying the clip. Sports podcasts dedicated entire episodes to discussing the officiating debate. Fans kept posting new examples from recent games, fueling the conversation further. What had started as one player's comment gradually evolved into a broader national discussion about the future of the WNBA. The timing of that debate mattered for another reason as well. The league was experiencing one of the fastest growth periods in its history. Attendance numbers were climbing, television deals were expanding, and new corporate sponsors were becoming interested in investing in women's basketball. A large portion of that momentum was directly connected to Clark's presence in the league. Whenever the Indiana Fever traveled for road games, attendance numbers often surged dramatically. Arenas that had previously struggled to fill seats suddenly sold out weeks in advance. Fans who had followed Clark during her historic college career were now showing up in large numbers to watch her compete at the professional level. Television networks noticed the shift immediately. Games featuring Clark consistently attracted higher ratings than many other matchups. Broadcast partners began promoting those games heavily, recognizing that they had the potential to draw viewers who might not otherwise watch WNBA games. Corporate sponsors were also paying attention. Brands that had previously invested only modestly in women's basketball began increasing their involvement. Marketing teams recognized that Clark was bringing a new generation of fans into the sport, young viewers who discovered the WNBA through her performances and were now becoming regular followers of the league. This surge of interest created a powerful new dynamic. Clark was not just an athlete performing on the court.
Gray hits Atlanta's first three of the game.
She had become a major economic driver for the league's current momentum. Her presence influenced ticket sales, television ratings, merchandise purchases, and sponsorship deals. That kind of commercial impact carries significant weight inside any professional sports organization. Behind the scenes, conversations reportedly began taking place among broadcast partners and sponsors about player protection and league stability. While these discussions were not public, the reasoning behind them was simple. If the player responsible for attracting so much new attention were unable to stay on the court due to injuries or excessive physical play, the league's rapid growth could slow just as quickly as it had begun. That possibility added another layer to the officiating debate. Fans online started discussing whether certain defensive strategies used against Clark were becoming overly aggressive. Some theories spread across forums, suggesting that opposing teams were intentionally applying extra physical pressure to wear her down during games. There was no official evidence confirming such claims, but the perception itself began shaping the conversation. When enough fans believe something might be happening, the narrative can take on a life of its own. Calls for stronger officiating oversight and clearer rules protecting star players began gaining traction. Analysts debated whether the league needed to adapt its approach as the visibility of women's basketball continued growing. For the WNBA, the situation represented both a challenge and a turning point. The sport was reaching new audiences and generating excitement that had been building for years. But with that growth came increased scrutiny from fans, media, and business partners alike. Caitlin Clark had not set out to start a controversy when she spoke during that podcast conversation. She simply addressed a topic that many people inside and outside the league had already been discussing quietly. Yet by choosing the right moment, the right platform, and the right tone, she turned that quiet conversation into a national one. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching just how powerful a single voice can become when the entire sports world is listening.
Bonner from way downtown. Oh, gee.
By the time the conversation around Caitlin Clark's comment had reached its peak, another layer of the story was beginning to surface behind the scenes. People who closely follow the business side of sports started realizing something important. This situation was no longer just about a referee's whistle or a player's opinion. The stakes had quietly grown far bigger than that. What had begun as a short observation during a podcast interview was now intersecting with the financial future of an entire professional league. Reports began circulating from various insiders and analysts, suggesting that league officials had started holding internal discussions about possible adjustments to officiating guidelines. These conversations were not public announcements, and many of the details remained unconfirmed. But the consistency of the reports made one thing clear. People inside the league were taking the situation seriously. Mid-season adjustments to officiating procedures are extremely rare in professional sports. Leagues usually prefer to wait until the off-season to review rules, evaluate referee performance, and make structural changes. Doing it during an active season can send a message that something within the system was not working properly. And that message can be difficult to control. If the league suddenly introduced new officiating instructions while games were still being played, it could easily be interpreted as an acknowledgement that the previous system had flaws. More importantly, it could look as though the change had been triggered by outside pressure, fans, media discussion, and most notably, Caitlin Clark's viral comment. That placed league leadership in a complicated position. If they made adjustments, critics might argue that Clark had been correct from the beginning. If they chose not to change anything, the growing conversation about officiating consistency would likely continue gaining momentum. Neither option felt comfortable. This was the corner the league had slowly backed itself into by remaining silent during the early days of the debate. A clear and confident response at the beginning might have shaped the narrative differently. But by the time internal discussions about possible changes were being reported, the public story had already developed the life of its own. Meanwhile, another major moment was approaching. Caitlin Clark was preparing to return from injury. For weeks, fans had been waiting for her comeback game. Normally, a player's return from injury is simply a sports story, an athlete regaining form, a team welcoming back an important contributor. But this time, the situation carried a very different atmosphere.
In her career, in a statement first quarter.
Every camera inside the arena was pointed at Clark. The attention wasn't only about her performance. It wasn't just about whether she would score efficiently or help her team win. The attention was about everything that had happened during the weeks leading up to that game. Everyone in the building knew the story. Fans knew it. Media members knew it. Players from both teams were aware of it. Coaches had certainly heard about it. And even the referees working the game understood that every call they made would be examined under an intense microscope. Clark's return was no longer just a basketball event. It had become a kind of live test. Every possession felt heavier than usual. Whenever Clark drove toward the basket, the crowd leaned forward collectively, watching for contact. When defenders bumped into her on the perimeter, fans reacted instantly, wondering whether a whistle would follow. Each moment was being recorded, clipped, and uploaded online almost instantly. This wasn't the normal scrutiny that accompanies professional sports. It was something sharper, more deliberate. Fans had essentially turned themselves into a real-time review system for the league's officiating. And Clark had become the measuring stick. Whenever she absorbed contact without receiving a foul call, the reaction inside the arena was immediate. Sometimes she simply looked toward the referee with a calm, almost knowing expression. It wasn't an angry protest. It wasn't dramatic frustration. It was the same composed look she had shown during the podcast conversation that started the entire debate. The crowd seemed to recognize it instantly. Many fans reacted as if they were witnessing a moment they had already been warned about. The connection between her earlier words and the events unfolding in real time felt almost symbolic. Clark had managed to accomplish something very few athletes ever achieve in professional sports. She had turned herself into a reference point for evaluating the system around her. Before her comment went viral, officiating complaints in the WNBA were mostly background noise. Players might express frustration during a post-game interview. Coaches occasionally hinted at disagreement with certain calls. Sometimes fines were issued quietly, and the league would release carefully worded statements emphasizing professionalism. But those discussions rarely reached the broader public in a meaningful way. There had always been an unwritten understanding between players and the league. Serious grievances were expected to remain internal. Public confrontation was discouraged. Most athletes accepted that arrangement because challenging it carried risks. Speaking out too loudly could lead to fines, criticism, or damaged relationships within the league. For years, that system worked largely because no individual player possessed enough public influence to challenge it without consequences. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and she disrupted that balance in a very different way. She didn't deliver an emotional speech.
Part of the reason why they're struggling,
She didn't release a long statement through a public relations team. She didn't organize a protest or demand immediate changes. Instead, she spoke calmly during a thoughtful conversation on a respected platform. 6 words. That was all it took. The internet did the rest. Within days, the moment had transformed from a single observation into a widespread movement among fans. The conversation was no longer limited to one player's perspective. It had evolved into a broader debate about transparency, accountability, and the future structure of women's professional basketball. And perhaps the most significant development was happening quietly in locker rooms across the league. Younger players were paying close attention. Athletes entering professional sports today understand the power of digital platforms better than any generation before them. They see how quickly a message can spread online and how effectively public support can influence conversations that once took place only behind closed doors. Clark's situation demonstrated something important to them. A player with enough credibility, visibility, and fan support could raise difficult questions publicly and still receive overwhelming backing from the audience. That realization represents a new kind of power. It does not require formal union negotiations. It does not rely on lengthy grievance processes. Instead, it comes from influence, followers, engagement, and the trust of the fan base. If that approach becomes more common, the WNBA could be entering a new phase in its development. Public conversations about league policies might become more frequent. Players might feel more comfortable discussing topics that were once considered off-limits in public settings. Issues such as travel conditions, marketing decisions, salary structures, and revenue distribution could all become subjects of open debate. History suggests that this pattern is not unusual in professional sports. Many major changes across different leagues began with athletes who were willing to use their visibility to highlight issues they believed deserved attention. In the NBA, players eventually used their platforms to push the league toward deeper engagement with social justice initiatives. In the NFL, public discussions around player safety and concussion protocols led to significant reforms over time. Even outside basketball and football, similar stories have unfolded. The United States women's national soccer team spent years publicly advocating for pay equity. Their persistence eventually resulted in structural agreements that reshaped compensation models within the sport. In many cases, the turning point began with a single voice that was loud enough and respected enough to be heard. At this particular moment in the WNBA, that voice appears to belong to Caitlin Clark. Whether the league leadership feels comfortable with that reality is another question entirely. Clark's influence brings enormous benefits to the sport. She attracts new fans, boosts television ratings, and helps expand the commercial reach of women's basketball. The energy surrounding her career has introduced millions of people to the WNBA who might never have watched otherwise. At the same time, accommodating every public challenge raised by a single player could create long-term precedents that affect the league's structure for years to come. Balancing those realities requires careful decision-making. League officials must consider how to maintain authority and stability while also recognizing the growing expectations of players and fans who want transparency and responsiveness. Ignoring the influence entirely could create unnecessary conflict. But responding without a clear strategy could reshape the power dynamics within the league in ways that extend far beyond Clark's career. Either way, one thing has become undeniable. The WNBA is not the same league it was before that podcast conversation happened. 6 calm words from a rookie sitting on the sidelines triggered a chain reaction that reached every level of the sport. Executives debated strategy in boardrooms. Referees faced unprecedented scrutiny from fans. Media outlets across the country began analyzing officiating practices and league policies. Most importantly, the conversation about who truly holds influence in women's professional basketball had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Clark didn't start a fight. She revealed one that had already been quietly developing beneath the surface. The disagreements about officiating, player treatment, and league growth were already present. Her comments simply brought them into the open at a moment when the sport was experiencing rapid expansion and heightened visibility. And sometimes visibility changes everything. The future of the WNBA will continue to evolve as new stars enter the league, new fans discover the game, and new business opportunities emerge. But moments like this become part of the sport's long-term narrative. Years from now, people may look back at this period and recognize it as a turning point, when players realized how much influence they truly had in shaping the direction of their league. Caitlin Clark didn't hold a press conference to make that happen. She didn't organize a campaign or deliver a fiery speech. She simply chose the right moment, the right platform, and the right words. And those words echoed far enough to shake an entire league. Whatever happens next in the WNBA, the impact of that moment will remain part of the story. The league now faces a choice: resist the changing dynamics of modern sports or adapt to a new era where players, fans, and media interact more directly than ever before. The athletes stepping onto the court today are not just competitors. They are voices shaping the future of the sport. And Caitlin Clark has already shown how powerful that voice can be when the entire basketball world is listening. If you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who wants to understand the deeper stories unfolding behind the games. Because sometimes the most important moments in sports are not the points scored on the scoreboard. They are the conversations that change the direction of the entire game.